I have to admit, I am very shocked about the current state of Chrono Odyssey. Chrono Odyssey had its closed beta running over the last weekend, and I was fortunate enough to actually participate. And as you might have heard, the game is receiving lots of negative feedback. I have to admit, I didn't have too much time to play this game actually, but it was really hard to enjoy the beta anyway, because there's just a lot of negative stuff going on right now. So I did check out the basics of the game, and today I want to give you my 2 cents and to basically share both the potential of the game, but also the issues that are currently arising, and hopefully the devs make some major changes on the game before it actually releases, because I can tell you if the game comes out this way, it's going to be a disaster. And as always, if you enjoy the video, I would be very happy if you could leave a like and also subscribe the channel for more content. But before we go into the positive and the negative things, for those of you who somehow missed what Chrono Odyssey actually is, I'm going to quickly sum up what the game actually is supposed to be. So Chrono Odyssey is going to be a non-pay-to-win action combat MMORPG in a dark fantasy sci-fi setting. It's coming from a Korean dev and is published by Kakao Games. And Korean devs have a bad track record for games being absolutely broken or completely pay-to-win, even though they promise to not make the game pay-to-win. This is something that the game already has to fight with, and they promise that the game is not going to be pay-to-win, but we are going to see about that. One of the biggest USPs of the game was that it's supposed to launch on console and PC at the same time, and it's going to have crossplay from the very beginning, so it's already getting console players on board, which is very rare for MMORPGs on launch, so I think that's a huge plus for the game. And the trailers looked absolutely amazing. They looked extremely good, to a point where people actually called it fake or basically said that it's rendered content, and even the gameplay just looked way too good. And I already made a video on the dev interview of Chrono Odyssey, and in this video people criticized that I mentioned an extreme huge difference between the gameplay material from the trailer and the actual gameplay material that was shown in the dev interview, but I think that this beta actually confirmed my concerns, and we're going to talk about that. The game was supposed to be enjoyable both for solo players and groups, and encourages exploration over linear leveling and linear story progression. So they want to provide a very non-linear open world, and they encourage you to do exploration on your own terms, combined with a collection and crafting system. We are not sure how important the crafting is going to be in this game, so the developer said that you can play the game your own way, so we are going to see about that. And as already mentioned, on the last weekend there was a closed beta test, and I was lucky enough to get access. And today I'm going to give you an overview of my experience with the closed beta. And I have to tell you, I was very shocked about the current state of the game. I didn't expect much, but I think it's even worse than what I expected. But one thing I want to mention, just to prevent any negative comments about the game could change, it's just a beta. You need to be aware of the difference between an alpha and a beta state of the game. Because an alpha usually tests the game's concept, and the game can change immensely afterwards, while the beta is actually used to test the finalized concept of the game, and is just used for bug fixing and finding broken mechanics to fix them, so the game can be fully released. So usually the beta state of the game is very, very close to the actual released version. And some games even run a beta just weeks before release. So by definition, if a game is in a beta state, it's almost finished. So my personal guess is that we are not going to see any drastic changes to the game and the game's quality upon release, which is not too far away actually. And let me tell you, if they do not change plans completely and they keep the game as it is right now, it's looking very bad for the game and its success on release. But before talking about the negative things, let's start with the positive things of the game, because even though the game is in a terrible state, I think that some things are worth mentioning. First of all, I think the overall setting and atmosphere and the design choices that they made are pretty unique and pretty cool. They have a pretty interesting and unique take by combining dark fantasy and sci-fi with this Korean MMO art style, and it just looks different from other games. And this is combined with some pretty good skill animations that are very solid, so I can't say any negative things about that. So I do think that the overall combat and skill animations do not feel clunky. They are in a pretty good state. There's always room for improvement, but I don't think they are in a very bad state at the moment. Classes also seem to be very interesting and play very differently. I was only able to test 3 classes out of the 6 classes that will be available on release, but I don't think that combat is terrible. It might actually be enjoyable for most of the action combat enjoying players, so especially if you're into high difficulty and high skill ceiling battles with dodges and parries and stuff like that, you will probably be able to enjoy the gameplay. Another positive thing is that there is a sense of freedom. I don't think that the game forces me to go down a certain path or follow some sort of strict story path, so I'm actually able to enjoy the world and explore the world at my own pace, and wherever I want to go first, I can go first, which is a pretty cool idea, and it fits to what they said in the dev interview. And not everything in the game is self-explanatory, so if you need, for example, gathering tools like a pickaxe or an axe, it's not given to you by some sort of story quest. You actually have to find the vendor and buy them. If you don't do that, you are not able to farm any materials, which I think is pretty cool. Some people that like everything pre-chewed are probably not going to like it, but for me, that's a positive thing about the game. And it might sound hard, but that's about it. That's everything that I can tell you about the game that I think is positive and has potential. So I do think that the negative aspects outweigh the positive immensely. So let's jump into all of the issues right now. Again, I know this is a beta state, but I do think that most of these issues will not change upon release. And you will find most of these problems in the release version of the game. So this is going to be the case unless they change their time plan completely and put 2 or 3 more years into the game, but otherwise these issues are going to be present. So let's start with the graphics of the game. Oh boy. As already mentioned, the trailers of the game looked amazing. However, the actual game compared to that looks absolutely horrible. You have to keep in mind that I have a high-end setup and I put the game to cinematic settings and I put everything on max, but the game still looks kind of bad. Don't get me wrong, I don't expect to see every strand of hair in a game. I even enjoy games that look like Albion, for example, having their own art style. But what I do expect from a game is that the quality is clean and that it doesn't hurt my eyes to actually look at the textures and try to understand what I'm looking at. What I can tell you about the graphics of Chrono Odyssey is that they are very grainy and out of focus and just it's hard to tell what I'm actually looking at. And sometimes I have to go very close to something to actually tell what the hell it was supposed to be. And the user interface of the game also looks kind of bad. I absolutely don't like it. Like the tooltips are too big, the damage numbers and the font are just ugly. Everything in the UI just made the game feel so much cheaper than it probably is. And I really hope that they rework the UI and just step up the whole UI design level. But going back to the graphics, I can tell you that the shadows in the game look really awful. Like it's absolutely lowering the overall quality of the graphics immensely. And this is combined with some of the textures in the game actually having some transparent pixels. Like this horse, for example, where some pixels on its body were actually transparent. I don't know what the exact issue is, but it just looks awful. Talking about textures, I do think that some of the textures in the game look really, really good and some look really bad. For example, this waterfall, I've probably never seen an uglier waterfall in any kind of game, or textures actually clipping through other objects, like the grass clipping through this wooden tub. And if that isn't enough, you also have some mispositioned textures like this floating rock, for example. And you can find many, many more texture issues throughout the whole game's areas. And it's a weird mix of actually good-looking textures and completely mispositioned, low-poly textures that are just hard to look at. And this doesn't just go for the game world, it also goes for the NPCs. They are straight up looking like corpses with glowing eyes and glowing hair, and it's just really weird to look at. Not gonna lie, they absolutely don't look like they feel well. Or for example, this NPC's coat that is absolutely looking hella weird while he's letting his drinking habits go through his head one more time. It was very weird to look at. Or for example, him. Is he okay? What the fuck is wrong with his neck? I think he needs help. And if this still isn't enough for you, let's talk about birds. Because they don't give a shit about textures. They are just flying straight through the floor, through mountains, you name it. They don't care about any kind of texture. They just fly wherever they want to fly. Speaking about contrast and lightning, well, what the is going on here? I can't even tell what the actual problem is, to be honest. But I do think I accidentally joined some rave party. But let's jump over to the next topic, which is character customization. Don't get me wrong, I think giving so many options in the character customization is a good thing. You offer some freedom how people want to create their character. But somehow, no matter what I do, my character just looks very weird and moves very weird and very out of proportion. I can't really explain why. And on top of that, you can actually create some very weird characters, which could end up in something cool, like this Kratos, for example, or like the minion version of Kratos, actually. But it could also potentially end up flooding the game with super weird looking characters, just like my very hot little Smurf that I created. I think I bring the word smurfing to another level. And I can absolutely imagine how this can destroy the whole atmosphere of 20 or 30 people around you just created some weird Smurf that looks absolutely ugly. I have to say, no thank you. I'd rather have a limited character creation than 30 or 40 very weird looking characters around me. That's just a personal opinion, but I don't like it. Next up, let's talk about how the game handles progression. So after finishing the tutorial areas, which is just fighting some enemies and a boss at the end, you are greeted by the open world, which is amazing. It doesn't force you to do anything or go anywhere. But if you want to follow the main quest, it immediately asks you to fight a boss. And in the interview, they called it a hard boss to force people to learn weapon swapping and learn the mechanics of the game. However, if you just stick with the main quest, the moment you face this boss, you are probably going to be level 2. So you have one ability. And you fight this boss right after enjoying a loading screen for 1 minute straight on a high-end setup just to load a small room with one enemy, just one player instance. I expect some very long loading screens on release, to be honest. But going back to the boss, I can tell you, I didn't expect this boss to be that hard. It took me a long time to actually kill the boss, and I even let my girlfriend fight the boss too, and she is a gamer but not really into action fighting games, and she barely did 5% damage, even in multiple fights. So I think that showcases how new player unfriendly this game actually is. And I understand if you ramp up the difficulty throughout the game, like at later stages that bosses are getting harder, but I think that 90% of the casual players are probably going to quit at this point. And this isn't just a problem with this single boss. In fact, some random mobs just roaming the level 1 area of the open world can basically 1 or 2 shot you. I just randomly died very quickly to some random mobs. Difficulty is a thing that they can change pretty quickly until release, but if it stays that way, I think it's very new player unfriendly. And overall, I just think that the balancing is kind of weird. Like, they have this bounty quest board with quests that they really praised in their dev interview, and I took this bounty quest to kill this huge ogre, and I was expecting a huge boss to fight for this quest, and then I met him. And he died pretty fast. I was actually pretty disappointed, to say the least. But let's talk about exploration in the game. As mentioned in my last video, the game has traversal, including jumping, climbing, and also crawling. And even though it adds some feeling of freedom to the game, it also feels absolutely horrible. It just isn't fun. It feels very clunky. It looks insanely bad animated. And this wouldn't be a problem if the game wouldn't constantly force you to use these mechanics for the whole exploration of the game. You have to jump and climb and crawl to reach certain areas of the map. And there are even game modes with some caves that expect you to jump and climb and crawl under lasers and stuff like that. So they seem to be very proud about having traversal in the game, but it feels just horrible. They made the game way too reliant on these systems, and they would have to change the whole game. So instead, I hope they just rework the whole traversal and make it feel a lot better. And also, by the way, add jump attacks, please. Jump attacks make everything better, please. Which brings us to combat and gameplay. Even though I already mentioned the combat animations feel clean and they feel okay, I still think that there's a lot of room for improvement, because there's a lot of stuff that is just not working. First of all, I have to say that the battles are full of desyncs, moments where you just get hit and you fall down but the animation won't come through. So you may keep walking, may keep attacking, and suddenly you teleport back and lay on the ground because you were actually knocked back like 2 or 3 seconds ago, but the game just didn't show you the right animation. And this is just one of many desyncs that I experienced throughout the game. I'm not sure if this is like an issue of the server or if the combat is just actually desynced. And I do think that this is especially a problem when it comes to PvP, but it's also just very frustrating because the game is hard. If you get hit once, you will probably die, maybe twice, and having desyncs combined with that can be very, very frustrating. The combat is combining like very good combat feedback with some very disconnected and desynced feelings, so it's a weird mix. And due to the combat being the core integral part of the game, it's not fun to keep playing if the combat is just frustrating. Crafting, on the other hand, seems to be a very solid and very integral part of the game. Still, I hope that it's not important, so I'm not a crafting person. I hope I can get everything in the game by not crafting. I also looted some gear from loot chests and enemies, so I do think that you will receive gear even if you do not focus on crafting, but it seems to overall work and be a pretty deep system. However, I'm not sure if this is a beta thing, but all the shops and the currency windows were just completely bugged out. Like, what does this cost mean? Like, is that intentional? Am I forced to learn a new number system, or is that just an issue from the beta, which is not going to be in the release? Lastly, I tried to at least play some of the extra content the game has to offer and stumbled upon a labyrinth, and I have to admit, man, this was boring as hell. Like, I literally just had to use a lever to activate the lift over and over and over again. No enemies, no bosses, just levers and levers and levers. So I do hope that the extra content gets more compelling later in the game. I can't tell you more about that, but I really hope it does. Alright, let's come to a conclusion, because unfortunately I was not able to dig deep into the game because of the short beta schedule, and I also had some personal things to do, but I also have to say that I wasn't really eager to keep playing. The game weirdly feels good, but is plagued with so many issues, and I really hope it succeeds long term. The current state of the game is pretty hard to enjoy, and I have to admit that if the game comes out this way, it's just not enjoyable at the moment. And people say it feels like a cheap version of New World, and I always thought that New World is looking kind of cheap, but I didn't know that it could even get worse. So yeah, it kind of feels like New World, a version of New World that is doing some things better, but more things worse. And it feels like the game is trying to offer so many things and it just fails in most of them. If that would be an indie project, I would say it has great potential. If the game gets additional 3 or 4 years of development, I would say that it's a solid foundation to build on. However, the issue is that the game is almost releasing. And if it releases in its current state, it's very concerning. What is certain is that this game is not going to be the savior for the MMORPG genre. And as expected, the trailers and the gameplay trailers again cleverly cut together like cool looking animations and somehow post-processed the whole graphics to look better, but this does not reflect the actual quality of the game. Which is another reason why you should always stay skeptical if you see a good looking trailer, because it might not reflect what you will actually play in the end. So I always recommend to wait for reviews or betas to actually test the game by yourself instead of just getting hyped by some trailer. But I am very curious about your feedback. Did you play the beta? Did you like it? Did you see other issues that I probably missed? Did you experience the end game? And if so, how does the end game actually feel? Are you still hyped about the game? And do you think the developers are going to deliver on release? Or did you lose your hype for Chrono Odyssey? Leave a comment in the comment section below. And did you know I also tested the early alpha state of Vindictus Defying Fate? If you didn't know, you can find the video here. Just click on it. It's a great video. I recommend checking it out. It's cool. The game isn't, but I mean, the game is kind of. You will see what I have to say about the game. Just check out the video. And if not, have a great day. Bye bye.